So you're ready to play in your first live, in-person OTB or over-the-board chess tournament. I'm going to talk you through the whole thing and give you some tips and tricks along the way. Although this episode is geared toward beginning tournament players, I suspect that those of you who've been around a while will enjoy listening as well. That's coming up. Stick around.
Welcome to the Chess Angle. This is not your typical chess podcast. If you're an amateur or club-level player, the Chess Angle is for you. Our content is aimed at busy adults who are serious about the game but have limited study time. Featured guests include both amateur and titled players alike. And now, here's your host, director of the Long Island Chess Club, Neal Bellon.
Welcome to episode 65 of The Chess Angle. Thanks so much for joining us. A quick programming note, barring any unforeseen circumstances, next week's episode will feature a guest. It'll be a national master, so I'm looking forward to that. And for this week, I am once again going to begin with our listener mailbag.
You've got mail.
This is an email from Simon, different Simon from last week. That's just a coincidence. From the UK. Again, a lot of listeners across the pond, which is great. Shout out to you guys. And Simon writes, I have a chess-related question for you that might be of interest to fellow listeners. I've just joined a local club and have signed up for a weekend chess congress. Do you have any hints and tips for someone who's never taken part in such an event before? Yes, I do. Great question, Simon. Thank you for your email. Thank you for listening to the podcast. I did receive a few requests to discuss this topic because we do have a lot of listeners who have never played in an OTB tournament and are looking to do so. So if you've never played in a live in-person event, it may seem overwhelming in the abstract, but it's the kind of thing where you just need to do it and you'll be fine. Now, before I get into it, there are two things I want to say up front. First, I'm taking the perspective, for the most part, that not only are you just getting into tournaments, but that as a player, you're a relative beginner or advanced beginner who's still developing his or her chess game as well. But that being said, I do think those of you who have had some OTB experience may get something out of this. And second, you're going to get two perspectives for the price of one, so to speak, because, as you know, I am both a player and a tournament director. So I'll be wearing both of those hats throughout this episode. I will not be wearing one of those annoying bright yellow tournament director t-shirts. They always seem to wear those at the major events, and they always seem to be like 2 sizes too big. I don't know. Maybe I didn't get the memo on that. You know, it's like, dude, you weigh 150 pounds soaking wet. You're not an extra large. You're like a man small or a medium. Anyway, I digress. I'm going to divide this episode into two main sections. First will be registering for the tournament, where I will also talk about how they're usually structured. And second will be some tips on playing in the tournament. And of course, I'm going to sprinkle in my own opinions on certain things, as always. So here we go. Now, I don't think I'm going to be able to cover every particular nook and cranny and nuance of these events, but I'm going to go through quite a bit of information that will hopefully be helpful. So first, let's talk about sort of registering for or preparing for the tournament and understanding the parameters and what you're going to be dealing with. So first and foremost, you're going to need chess equipment, which is essentially a board and pieces, a clock, a pen or a pencil, and a scorebook. Unless you're using an electronic score sheet, I'll talk more about that in a bit, but most of you are probably going to keep score by hand. Sometimes the tournaments provide the score sheets. They're usually provided. Sometimes, depending on if it's a club or a major event, they'll also provide the equipment. Most don't. I mean, most major tournaments and chess clubs require that you bring your own equipment. But of course, every club is different, so you'll need to find that out. What I tell some people who are new to tournaments, especially if you're not quite sure if you're going to commit to it long term. You may not want to jump in and buy equipment right away. Even though technically you're supposed to have it, you may want to use your opponent's equipment until you decide it's something you want to do on a regular basis. But you are going to need your own equipment at some point. And the great thing about chess, as opposed to other hobbies and interests, it's relatively inexpensive. I mean, I remember back in the day, I used to play hockey. I used to play ice hockey. I was a goalie. I'm not even going to say how much the equipment was. You know, if you look at some sports leagues, if you look at, you know, how much a round of golf is, I mean, the only thing that's really expensive in chess would be the entry fees for the major events. But for your local club, it's pretty minimal, the fees and the overhead involved. But you are going to need your own equipment. Again, a board and pieces, a clock, a pen or pencil, and a scorebook. Now, for the board and pieces, the tournament standard is generally the roll-up vinyl boards. Sometimes it also has that like silicone, like that mouse pad material. I have a board like that. Those are really nice because they fold well, they don't get creased, and they're very, very durable. You can get this stuff on Amazon or anywhere. It's pretty accessible. And then I would get the plastic pieces. I would recommend you get the weighted ones. They're just really nice to play with. They don't knock over easily. They're pretty durable. And you want to get what's called the Staunton style. You don't want to get a style of pieces that are too funky because, you know, it has to meet the quote unquote tournament standard. For a clock, you want to get a digital clock. I mean, the analog clocks, they don't really use those anymore because time delay is pretty much standard now. And the digital clocks, of course, are much more accurate to the second. You're going to want to get a pen or a pencil, or bring one with you, I should say, to keep score, because that's required. And as I said, you either want a scorebook with you, or sometimes score sheets will be provided. All right, so that's just a quick primer on equipment. You're also going to need to be a member of your country's governing chess body. So here in the States, it's the USCF, the United States Chess Federation. I mean, if it's a FIDE event, you'll have to have your FIDE membership, et cetera, et cetera. So just make sure that's taken care of. You can generally do that on your own. Some tournaments will do it for you. Others will require you to do it on your own. Like at my club, I don't do that just because I'm too busy with pairings and other things. I tell everybody they have to go online and do that themselves. Some other clubs might give you a discount if you get the membership through them. But regardless, you are going to have to join the governing body of whatever organization hosts the tournament or whoever's rating it. The next thing you will notice in the advertisements for the tournaments, there's going to be a lot of chess abbreviations and terms in the tournament listing that you may not be familiar with. I'm going to go through a few now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link in the show notes. The Continental Chess Association, which runs most of the major tournaments here in the States, their website is chesstour.com, and they have a page on their site. As I said, I'll link it up, which gives an excellent example of or explanation of all the common abbreviations. So when I put this link, just scroll down about 3/4 of the way and it'll show it. It says tournament life abbreviation and terms. You know, for example, it'll say CC means chess club, EF is entry fee, ENT is where to enter the tournament, HR is hotel rates, et cetera, et cetera. So all that stuff is there if you want to check it out. Now, as far as the pairings, how it's determined who you will play, the Swiss system, which is usually abbreviated by SS. So if it says like 5SS, that'll mean like 5 Swiss system or 5 rounds. The Swiss system is the most common pairing system, but I think it's also the worst. And here's the way it works. Basically, let's say you have 20 players, just to use a small number. The top half plays the bottom half. So if it's round 1, you have 20 players. 1 through 10 obviously is the top half. 11 through 20 is the bottom half. So 1 would play 11, 2 would play 12, etc. And that's the most common way. The problem is that in the earlier rounds, it generally favors the higher rated opponents because the top half plays the bottom half. It's somewhat uneven. So, you know, there's an argument that it's not a great system. I'm not crazy about it. There are variations within the Swiss system, such as random pairings, which I believe in. There's also accelerated pairings. I think there's like 1 versus 2 pairings. These are great options that make things more equitable, but they will likely never be mainstream because, if I'm being honest, chess is just very stubborn. Everyone's set in their ways. A lot of TDs don't want to change things. A lot of TDs aren't even aware of these variations, but the Swiss system, again, is really what you're dealing with. But I'm not crazy about it because it's that whole top half plays the bottom half. I think it should be a little more random, but that's what you're dealing with. So anyway, after the first round, what happens is then winners play winners, losers play losers. So everyone who has a point, that system's used again, where top half plays the bottom half, everybody who drew, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so if you lose the game, you're likely going to play someone else who also lost. There are other pairing methods, such as a round robin. That's usually a smaller event. Round robin is where basically you play everyone else in the tournament once, that type of thing. But most club events, most of the major events, are going to be the Swiss system. Now, the next thing has to do with playing in your local club event versus the major events. Now, obviously, the main difference is that the major events have significantly more participants. The prizes are usually bigger. If you're just starting out, I think your local chess club is preferred if you have one. Now, I get it. Some people will not have access to a chess club near them, and so the major events are their only choice. I get it. But what's nice about a chess club, it's usually a small group. It's much more relaxed. You can kind of cut your teeth and not deal with a lot of the nonsense that goes on in the major events. With clubs, you can also stop by first and check it out, because I'll get emails from people with a lot of questions and they'll say, can I stop by? And I'm like, sure. I'm like, that's actually the best thing. Come by, hang out, check out the games. And most of the time that ends up calming them down, because they visit the club and they're like, oh, okay, I get it. I see how this works. Because as I said, in the abstract, it sounds like a lot to take in if you've never done it. But I strongly recommend starting out with your local club if you have one, just because the major events are just so busy and so crazy. We'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. So moving on, you want to find out what your tournament's cell phone policy is. Now, these vary. It's usually a little more lenient at the club events. At the major events, the general rule is that cell phones are not allowed. They have to be turned off, or in many cases, you can't even have them in the room, which can be a problem if you need to stay connected. But obviously, there's issues with cheating and other things. Not going to go down that rabbit hole now. I know at our club, the Long Island Chess Club, I do allow cell phones to be on, but they have to be on vibrate or silent. Cheating's really not an issue, but we have people with careers and families, and they need to stay connected, right? People have families at home. We have lawyers, we have doctors. They need to be in touch for work. So I have an issue with telling people that their phone is to be turned off completely. I have not had any issues with it as far as cheating or anything like that. And if someone did try to cheat at a local club, I mean, they would stand out like a sore thumb, because it's really more of a fishbowl type thing. At the major events, it's so big and so overwhelming. It's a different story. So I kind of understand that they need to have that policy, but you're going to need to find that out. And if that's an issue for you, you may need to deal with that. So find out what the cell phone policy is. Some clubs also have a policy for electronic scorekeeping. Now, I wouldn't recommend that you jump in and get one of these devices right away, but you can keep score electronically. They do have devices available. I did an entire episode on that. Won't get into it now, but if you get serious about tournaments and you play on a regular basis, it's something you might want to look into. The advantage is, by keeping score electronically, it saves it as a PGN file, and then when the game's done and you go home, you can put it on your computer and the game goes directly into your engine. You don't have to input the moves individually. No more messy score sheets. It's something down the road you may want to think about. I'm not going to overwhelm you with it now, but the reason I'm mentioning it, some clubs have a no electronic scorekeeping policy. They don't allow them, which I don't agree with, but that's the rule. And some other clubs will not allow certain devices. For example, the Continental Chess Association, which does the major events here, I mentioned them. At this time, they do not allow the chess noter, which I use, which interestingly is the only one available right now. They allow only the Manoir, I believe. But the point is, you need to check your club's policy on electronic scorekeeping if that's a direction you want to go in. Okay, one thing I want to throw in now before I forget, I strongly recommend that you do not play speed chess between rounds. I know it's a thing. I know it happens at all the tournaments. Guys do it at my club as well, but I don't recommend it. I think it messes with your head. If you lose, you're not doing well. You can drag that baggage into the game. I just don't think it's a good idea because, again, these are generally slow time controls. I wouldn't do it. Now, some people might fight me on that. I just don't think it's a good idea. I think you're better off just kind of clearing your head. So don't fall into that trap of playing speed chess between rounds. I wouldn't do it. You also hear stories how the night before an early round, people are up all night playing speed chess. Probably not a good idea. Just wanted to throw that in there. Moving on. You're also going to deal with some interesting personality types at these tournaments. This is only a small percentage. Most people, everyone's cool. Everyone just wants to play. Everyone's quote unquote normal, but you're going to deal with the person sitting next to you who honestly, smells like BO or hasn't showered and is very slovenly. You are going to deal with that. You are going to deal with some annoying chess parents. Like, one of the things that drives me bonkers is as soon as the pairings go up, everybody, bum rushes the pairings just to see who they're playing. I don't see what it is. It's like they're giving away money or something. So it's like this mad rush to the pairing chart. And then you have these parents who they see what their child is playing or who their child is playing, and they jump on their laptop and they look up the opponent's rating. Oh, okay, your opponent played in this. It's like, really? Just let the kid play. But, you're going to see all of these types of different personalities. This is especially true at the major tournaments. This is one of the reasons I'm recommending the club level to start, because you generally don't deal with this as much. But you're going to deal with all sorts of personality types, so just be aware of that. Now, the last thing I'm going to throw in this section are some things that you don't want to do because they are going to annoy the TD. So I'm putting on my tournament director hat. Do not ask the tournament director to set your clock. If you want the tournament director to become your enemy within a few seconds, ask him or her to set your clock. We hate that. I'm going to repeat that. We hate that. Okay? Because basically what you're telling me is that you were too lazy to read the directions and figure out how to do it yourself. That's a big pet peeve for us. It is the player's responsibility to know how to set your clock. In fact, it's in the rule book that directors are not responsible for setting clocks. That's in the USCF rulebook. You can check that out for yourself. All right. I recently purchased a new clock that I really like because the one I was using, I used for years. It was time for a new one, kind of gave out. And I sat down and I figured out how to use it. I thought it was going to take 15, 20 minutes. Took me 5 minutes. Just read the directions. They're easy to set. Do not ask the TD how to set your clock. That is a you thing. That is not an us thing. Also, do not ask the TD for a pen. Do you have a pen I can borrow? No, I don't. Okay, that's your responsibility. I provide score sheets. Most tournaments will provide score sheets. That might be required. I don't know if that's a rule or not. But I generally provide score sheets. Some people like to use a scorebook. But you need to have a pen on your own. The other thing is, especially if it's like a local club, don't call the tournament director for club information 15 minutes before round one begins. All right. Because if I'm running a tournament at my club, the first round, the first night is always crazy because you got people entering and I'm doing the pairings. I mean, I've had people call me 10 minutes before the round starts on the first night, or they'll call a friend. Oh, can you put Neal on the phone? Because I need directions on how to get there. Are you kidding me? Like, seriously, you knew about this. You waited until 10 minutes before the round starts. No, I cannot give you directions. And hello, it's 2023. Like, Google Maps Like, how do people, I just don't get, like, I have no patience for like Luddites. I don't. I'm sorry. I sound like a grouchy old man now. It's 2023. Google Maps. Hello. But anyway, you'd be surprised how many people call for club info as I'm doing the pairings for round one. And of course, I want them to come to the club. Absolutely. And I'll help you out as much as I can, but you need to email me in advance or call me in advance. All right. So these are just some things to keep in mind. If you're new to a club or a tournament and you have questions, you want to contact the tournament director in advance, because while we're doing the pairings and while we're getting ready, we just don't have time to speak to you about that. That's also one of the reasons why at my club, that USCF membership, you have to get on your own. Now, if I do it through my club, I get like a commission. I get like, it's like $3 per membership, but to me, the juice isn't worth the squeeze, right? Is that the right saying? The squeeze? Yeah, the juice is not worth the squeeze. Yes. I'm notorious for like butchering these sayings. But anyway, the problem is also I can't take time away from doing the pairings to go on my laptop and register people for their membership. I think that's true for a lot of local clubs, but just be aware of that. Try to take care of that stuff in advance. If it's a quick question, fine. But if you have a list of like 5 or 6 questions because you're new to tournaments, you can't do that while we're getting the pairings ready. Sorry if that was a little, hey, you kids, get off my lawn. But I just want to throw that out there because it's going to save you and the tournament director a lot of aggravation down the road. All right, so let's talk about playing in the actual tournament. Sorry, I got a little ranty in that first part, but you know me, I say what's on my mind. So let's talk about playing. Couple of things, these aren't in any particular order, but I think there's some useful points. First thing is, there's no talking in the tournament hall unless you're offering a draw, resigning, something like that. I'm amazed even at my club how many people are carrying on full-blown conversations when I'm making my announcements or even during the games. Can't do it. All right, there's no talking in the tournament hall. Keep that in mind. Second thing is touch move. There's a lot of misconceptions or misunderstandings with this. Most of you probably know this. If you touch a piece, you have to move it. If you touch a piece that can be legally moved, that's an obligation to move. You have to move it. It doesn't go by the clock. All right, this is not speed chess in Washington Square Park, although even there, I'm not sure what the rule is. But anyway, a lot of people will touch a piece, change their mind, and the opponent's like, nope, you touched it. And they'll say, oh, no, but I didn't press my clock yet. Doesn't go by that. The clock is irrelevant with touch move. If you touch a piece that can be moved, you have to move it. So keep that in mind, right? It's the old saying, sit on your hands until you know what piece you want to move, something like that. So keep that in mind. Another butchered rule or principle is threefold repetition. Basically, what that means is if the same exact position, all 64 squares, if the same exact position is about to happen for the third time, and it does not have to be consecutively, it can be non-consecutively, but if the same exact position is about to happen for the third time, you can declare a draw by threefold repetition. It's not really perpetual check. Perpetual check is a myth. We call it that. It's technically not a draw by perpetual check. It would be a draw by threefold repetition. Perpetual check is more of kind of like a slang term, right? Where you just kind of repeat, but technically it's threefold repetition. So keep that in mind because few things. Number one, a lot of newer players don't even know about threefold repetition, that it's even a rule. And second, a lot of people do not handle it properly. Technically, what you're supposed to do is when you're about to make that move that will repeat the position for the third time, you're supposed to pause your clock and then declare the draw, and you show it on your score sheet. And remember, for threefold repetition, right? Say that 10 times fast. Threefold repetition. Anyway, to claim a draw by threefold repetition, you have to have the moves on your score sheet to support that. So keep that in mind. Speaking of keeping score, you do need to get used to that. First of all, it's required. And second of all, It can be used in a dispute, and you're also going to want a copy of it to study the game. But you have to get used to keeping score. That was a hard thing for me for a while. I found it like really annoying when I first got into tournaments, but it is required. Now in sudden death, time controls like a game 90, game 75, where it's just like one control, which is how it should be, but that's a separate argument. Anyway, in sudden death time controls, as soon as either player has less than 5 minutes on his or her clock, both players can stop keeping score if you wish. All right. But other than that, you do have to keep score. Algebraic is the standard. Some people still use descriptive, like pawn to king 4, which is like mind boggling to me because I look at descriptive notation. I can't even follow what's algebraic is the standard, like E4, E5, knight F3, whatever it is. Okay. You need to get used to that. You also need to get used to using a clock. All right. We'll talk a little bit more about clocks in a minute, but the whole keeping score, using a clock, that can be very distracting and off-putting for newer tournament players. But too bad, so sad. You got to get used to it. Now, speaking of clocks, time delay is now standard. It's the accepted standard. I remember back in the day when time delay was kind of a fringe thing, and a lot of the old guard players were like vehemently against it. I happen to love time delay. I think it's an amazing and fascinating addition to the game. I think it makes the board and what's happening on the board and the position more important than the clock. It gets rid of a lot of the ridiculous time scrambles at the end, etc., etc. Now, the delay or the Bronstein mode is standard, not the increment like online where you gain time. With the standard delay, there's just a countdown before your main time starts. So in other words, if there's a 10-second delay, it'll tick down for 10 seconds before your moves start, but no time is added to your clock. So it's not like an increment like when you play on chess.com. It's a standard delay, or the Bronstein mode, it's sometimes called. So you have your delay, which is that, not the increment, right? A delay is one thing. A delay doesn't add time to your clock. An increment does. And in live tournaments, it's generally a delay. Some may use increments, but the delay without the increment, without you gaining time, is standard. Most clubs, it's usually 5 seconds or 10 seconds. Some major tournaments or even some clubs have it as 30 seconds. Ours is game 90, delay 10. I've also heard of game 90, delay 30. That's out there. But of course, you'll check out the tournament publicity to find out what your club or tournament's time control is. Now let's talk about openings. All right, because I have some thoughts on this. So let me say this up front. Know what you're going to open with for both black and white. Eventually, you want to decide on a set opening repertoire that you will stick to. But as a developing player, you probably won't have that yet, which is fine. But you need to get there. And that, of course, is only going to come with experience and trial and error. I settled on my own repertoire after years of playing in tournaments. You need what I call a forever repertoire. Figure out the best openings for you and stick with them. I will actually be doing a follow-up episode, a remake, really, if you will, not so much a sequel, but kind of a remake of episode 1 of this podcast, which is called Chess Openings and the Amateur Player, which has done very well. I don't know if it's the subject. I don't know if it's because it's our first episode. I mean, we have something like 27,000 downloads, which is crazy. But I'm going to review some info from that first episode. And I'm also going to talk again about developing a forever repertoire. And don't worry, I'm not going to try to convince everybody to play the London system. Okay. But remember, the purpose of the opening is to get a playable middle game. That's the purpose of the opening as far as I'm concerned. So after your opening, if you're equal, slightly better, or much better, regardless of which color you have, your opening was successful. That's how you determine if your opening repertoire is wrong for you and if it's working. All right. If you're using an opening and the majority of the time you're getting a middle game where, again, you're equal, slightly better, or much better, that's a good opening for you. And remember, you need to give it time before giving up on an opening. Don't play 2 or 3 games and it doesn't go well and, well, that's it. Like, for example, I dropped the Sicilian and the symmetrical openings for black, like E4, E5, after playing a ton of games. All right, now that's just me. I'm not a fan of, again, the Sicilian, the symmetrical openings. I just think they're too complicated. There's too much theory. I think it takes study time away from other things. But that's just my own background and my experience. If you're playing the Sicilian, if you're a relative beginner or an advanced beginner, if you're playing the Sicilian and you're getting playable middle games, keep on playing the Sicilian and go tell me to fly a kite. That was just my experience, all right? But at some point, you're going to have to develop your own opening repertoire and stick with it. Now, you may say, why are you saying to stick with them? Because if you do this whole thing where, oh, I'm going to try different openings and I'm going to do this opening you're going to be so mired in opening theory that you're going to be spending so much time on openings. By having a set repertoire, it gets to a point where you just have to do kind of a touch up, or a brush up. You don't need to constantly spend time on openings because you've developed that already. And you can spend time on things that are really going to help you improve, such as end game things, middle game ideas, tactics, etc., etc. You don't want opening theory to bog you down and to take study time away from you, which presumably is already limited. All right. But again, at some point, maybe even this season, I am going to do a follow-up episode to episode 1 or a remake of that episode to add some additional information. And I'm going to talk about developing a forever, quote unquote, repertoire that works for you and your style, because the openings that I use, I'm not going to go through them now. I've done that ad nauseum. The openings that I use work for me and my personality and my style and my schedule and how much time I can study. But what works for me may not be right for you. In the follow-up episode, I'll certainly share the openings I use and why I chose them, but I'm going to try to give you some other ideas as well, just as a fellow amateur player and someone who sees these types of games on a regular basis. All right, so that's going to be coming up. So some thoughts on openings. There's that slogan by Nike, I believe, just do it. I think that's true when you enter tournament play as well. Just play. The best way is to just jump in and do it. You will probably have a lot of losses at first, but hang in there. And some thoughts on that. And I'm going to be just brutally honest here. Okay. If you can't handle the losing, which presumably will happen in the beginning, you're going to have a tough time. I'm just letting you know up front. Let me give some examples. I've had a number of adults who have come to my club. They're all excited about playing. They're into chess. Maybe it was from Queen's Gambit, pandemic, et cetera, that whole thing. But this happened even before the pandemic, where for whatever reason, they got the bug to enter tournaments. They come to the club. They lose all their games for the first few tournaments, and they never come back. It happens, because who wants to do that and put all that time in and lose? And I get it, and it's unfortunate. There are some things in life, as far as I'm concerned, where if you're losing, it's like, who cares? For example, back in the day, I used to play a lot of pickup basketball games. Where I grew up on Long Island, we had a lot of parks, and there was a park just a few blocks from my house, and they would have pickup basketball games. It was great. I absolutely loved it. I used to play all the time. But you know what? If I lost a lot of games, I didn't care. There was just something about pickup basketball where it was just fun, the exercise, and it was like, who cares? There's something about chess where if you're not winning a lot of games, it's just, it's hard to take. It's very hard on the ego. It's very deflating. And if you are extremely sensitive to that, if you have a real fragile ego, you're going to have a tough time. So you need to shake that off. Don't think about it, just play. But it's the reason I'm mentioning this, it's very common to go through those strings of losses. I went through it. Okay. I went through it. Were there times where I was like, this is an absurd hobby, tournament chess. I don't think it's for me. I think I want to stop. Sure. But I had enough good games as well, and I enjoyed it so much that I hung in there and I turned things around. Okay. When I first started playing in tournaments as an adult, I mean, I think after my first event, my rating was, I don't know, 800. No, I don't have it in front of me, but you know, I've mentioned this before. I thought players rated like 1,500 were like superheroes. I'm like, how is this going to happen? And I worked my way up. My peak rating is, I think, 1885. I like to be upfront about these things. I'm in a slump now. I think I'm like 1730 now. And again, that is my over-the-board USCF rating. I don't really talk about my chess.com ratings. Those are higher, but those are like junk ratings as far as I'm concerned. But you know, so I'm in a little bit of a slump right now I'm about 150 points lower than my peak. And I'm slowly working my way up because I dropped down even more than that. All right. Like just as a little bit of a rabbit hole, these types of rating swings are very normal at the amateur level where, you know, you'll get to like using me as an example, I got up to 1885. Right. And I'm thinking, all right, you know, maybe 1900 expert. And then, and again, there's no ego here because I like to be upfront about these things. I got up to 1885. I dropped, I'm not making this up, all the way to my floor, which is 1600, which is like, I mean, you want to talk about ego. That was brutal. Just, and again, no excuses, but just between different things, distractions, playing when I probably shouldn't have, facing lower rated players, you know, who were quote unquote 1,000, but really weren't 1,000, whatever. I'm not going to make excuses, but went from about 1885 to all the way to 1600. And I got it back to 1730 about, which is saying something. And I'm trying to work my way back to where I was in the high 1800s. But again, lately I've been distracted. I haven't been playing as much just because of my grad school responsibilities. A lot of times I'll show up to the club and I'll do the pairings, but then I'll sit down and just do schoolwork just because I'm so bogged down, you know, because some people like, you know, how do you do all that? Well, I don't. I'll sometimes use the club as a study session for my graduate work. So I haven't been playing as much. Even in the tournament we just had, it was a 5-round tournament. I only played one game, you know, because I had some family things. I had some, you know, so that's part of the reason too. I'm just not quite playing as much as I would like, or as I need to get my rating back. But these types of swings are normal, right? So I'm hoping soon, you know, to get back to the high 1800s where I was, but slumps happen. And the point is, I know I kind of went on a little bit of a tangent with my own personal story, but you need to be able to handle the losses that are very common when you first enter tournaments. And I've seen some unfortunate stories with this. I had a father whose son entered the tournament. He was maybe a high school kid, maybe 10th grade. And I explained, because I just had a feeling, because again, you know, I'm a parent, I'm a school teacher, I can kind of read kids pretty well. And I said, you know, is he going to be okay losing games? Because I said, you know, we're not really a scholastic club. It's mostly adults. Oh, he'll be fine. He'll be fine. He wants the experience. And I said, okay. And every time the child lost, just walked out very sad, head down. And I was like, oh, geez, because I don't want to see that. I don't want someone to have that experience. And what annoyed me, though, is at the end of the tournament, after the final round, the father's like, well, you know, he kind of didn't have a great time. He kind of lost every game, almost like putting it on me. And, you know, I said to him, I said, you know, I explained this to you up front. I asked you how he does with loss. I said, are you sure you want to do this? And I explained, I go, this is tournament chess. I go, it's not a casual club. I go, it's competitive. I go, people come here, they want to win their game. I go, I explained this to you up front. So, you know, don't put this on me. And, you know, I mean, I get it. He was just frustrated, but, you know, they left and they never came back. I never saw them again. And it's sad, but these things happen, and tournament chess is not for everybody. It's tough on the ego. The Swiss system of pairing, does everything to highlight that, right? Because you look at the wall chart, it always lists them in order from rating from highest to lowest. When the pairings are done, the stronger players are always on top, or the ones who have the better score in the tournament are on top, and the weaker players are always at the bottom boards, right? The Swiss system, it's always the top half plays the bottom half. So not only, your rating might be low, let's say, and as far as showcasing that, the Swiss system does everything in its power to, kind of highlight that at the tournament. So if you have a fragile ego, these events can be tough in the beginning. So it's just, I didn't mean to get too deep and philosophical there, but just understand, I guess the short answer, what do the kids say? TLDR, too long didn't read these acronyms. The TLDR version is basically that you're going to have to be able to handle some of these losses in the beginning. And I know what some of you are going to say, well, I know a guy, I've mentioned this before in a previous episode. Well, I know a guy, he played in one tournament or two tournaments. He was already 1,800. I know a guy who, played for 6 months and he was 2,000. Those are exceptions, not the rule. Those are outliers. Those are people who probably had a tremendous amount of chess experience before entering their first tournament. So don't get caught up in that. Don't get caught up in comparisons. Just play. Enjoy yourself as much as possible. Try to win, but don't get too caught up in your rating and the score at first. That's just part of the process. It's something that you need to play through. So a note about ratings. I've mentioned this before. I don't quite believe tournament players who say they don't care about their rating and that they play quote unquote for fun. If that were true, they would play chess at their kitchen table with Uncle Bob, not in tournaments, right? These players, I just play for fun. I don't care about my rating. I just play for fun. I just enjoy the game. Oh, okay. I'm not really buying what you're selling. Let me give some examples. We had a titled player here on Long Island who had posted something on Facebook. Well, what happened was we have a Facebook page. Obviously, most of the members are amateur players and improvers and class players rated probably below 1,600, maybe even below 1,400. So you get the idea. Obviously, there's a few titled players on there as well, but most of the members of our Facebook page are amateurs. And someone had posted something about rating and how he wasn't having fun and, something about how he was upset that his rating wasn't increasing. And one of the titled players posted something like, well, I just play for fun. And, I don't know why everyone's concerned about rating. And as far as I'm concerned, that's very disingenuous. A titled player telling a bunch of amateurs that they shouldn't worry about rating. I mean, come on, you've already achieved a high rating. So it's very easy for you to say that, whatever, 2,300, whatever it is. It's like a multimillionaire telling average folks, well, I don't know why you're so concerned about money. Yeah, well, you already have a ton of it. That's that. I don't know if that's the best analogy, but you get the idea. And he basically replies, this titled player, well, I don't get why everyone's concerned about it. I just play for fun. And yet, when he came to one of our tournaments and lost the first round of 5 or 6 to a 1,900 player, he dropped out, right? So he's, given this whole speech about, oh, I just play for fun. But yet when he came to the club and got upset in the first round, he drops out. So that's what I mean when I say a lot of these players are disingenuous, right? They make all these comments, until they lose a game to an 11-year-old rated 1,000, right? So not quite buying what you're selling. I think people say that as a defense mechanism. I don't know. These tournament players who say they're really not concerned about rating, I'm just not buying it. So the reason I mention it, if it does concern you, if it's bothering you that your rating's not where you want it to be, that can be a good thing because it'll motivate you to perform well and to work harder. You have to care about the result. I mean, I'm not going to get all searching for Bobby Fischer, that scene with Bruce Pandolfini. Oh, you have to hate your opponent. You have to hate them. They hate you. No, I'm not going to get into that. It's not about that. But, try to play to win. You have to care. If you're apathetic, you're not going to get good results. If a loss doesn't bother you, you're not going to improve and get good results. And I mean, if you just like, oh, okay, I lost the game. Oh, okay. Like you're not, I'm not saying you have to act, but it should bother you when you lose a game. And meaning when I say bother you, like, okay, I want to fix this. I want to get better. I want to find out where my mistakes are, because that's how you improve. And again, analyzing your games with an engine, your tournament games with an engine, is probably the most important thing you can do, because you can see the patterns and where you're going wrong. So anyway, when the game is over, you will then report the score. You or your opponent will report the score or mark the score on the pairing chart. What usually happens is the person who loses usually just storms out of the tournament hall, and then the winner usually marks the score. I don't know, it just seems to work that way a lot, especially at the major tournaments. But if white wins the game, he gets 1, black gets 0. If black wins, it's 0-1. If it's a draw, it's a half point each. Most of you probably know that, but you need to remember to mark the score. And the last thing I'm going to say as far as playing, and then I'll get into some additional things, the correct way to offer a draw is something we need to talk about. This is another rule or procedure that is butchered quite a bit. The correct way to offer a draw is for you to wait until it's your turn to move. So your clock is running. You make your move, you offer the draw, and then you press your clock. So you go, whatever it is, knight F6, I offer a draw, then you hit your clock. However, if you offer a draw in a different way, in other words, that's the correct way. It's not the only way. That's the proper way to offer the draw. But if you just blurt out, let's say it's not your turn to move. Let's say your opponent's clock is running and you just blurt out, I offer a draw. That does count. So no one can say, oh, well, no, you didn't offer it the right way. No. If you say the word draw at any point, even if it's not your turn to move, it counts. So just be aware of that. And don't say things like, oh, it looks like a draw. That's a draw offer. Like, you can't, some people do that to try to like get a read on their opponent. You got to be careful with that. Because if I'm playing you, let's say it's a tough position and I think I might lose. If you say to me, it looks like a draw or something like you got to be careful, because I can accept that. I can look at that as a draw offer. So be very careful about what you say when you use the word draw. But again, the proper way to offer the draw is to wait until it's your turn to move. You make your move, offer the draw, and hit your clock. Now, that being said, if you're the one who's being offered the draw, for example, if your opponent says to you, I offer a draw, okay, check it out. You have the right to say, and you should say, make your move first and I'll consider it. So what I mean by that is some players on the move will offer a draw. They'll offer you a draw before they move. And what you should do, and you have the right to do this, is say, please make your move first and I'll consider it. And guess what? He can't take it back. Now, if it's a checkmate, that's different. But if he makes a move and he realizes it's a winning move, there's no backsies. And then if you notice that his move is winning, you can just accept the draw. So that's a big, big thing you can use as a strategy. So if your opponent, again, offers a draw without moving first, you should say, make your move first and I'll consider it. And if his move is a winner, you can just shake hands and get half the point. All right. So make him move first before he offers the draw. So just be aware of that. A lot of people don't know that. For this final segment, I want to discuss some additional tips and tricks, or some thoughts really. So first, if you are an adult in a lower section, which is likely because you're going to be new to tournaments, there will be lots of kids. So just be aware of that. Some people don't like that. They find it annoying. But again, if you're a beginner or if you're unrated, it's likely you're going to be with a lot of kids. You're just going to have to deal with that. And be aware that they will try the scholar's mate or the 4-move mate on you. They love doing that. Just be aware of that. Don't fall for it. I'm assuming you know that. But the kids in the lower sections, they're going to try the 4-move mate. Now, which brings us to the next thing. Should you play up? Meaning, should you play in a section that is much higher than your current rating range? That's a big discussion in tournaments. And my answer is this: probably not if you're just starting out. because you may get tougher games, but the experience may not be good for you. I don't want to say definitely don't do it, but you got to kind of weigh the pros and cons and think about it. And moving up to a higher section is not necessarily going to eliminate playing kids, because some people do that. They're like, I know I'm a beginner, but I'm 45 years old. I don't want to play kids, so I'm going to play up. But you're still going to face kids there anyway. So, I mean, ideally for improvement, this is my opinion, you want your opponents to be about 100 to 150 points higher, maybe 1 to 200 points higher, around there. So if you're rated 1200, ideally you want players or opponents like 1300, 1400, because they're high enough that you'll get a challenging game, but they're not that high that, you may not have a chance to win or something like that. And you'll still, learn something and get something out of it. But if you're rated 1200, playing, 16 or 1700 players, probably not a good idea. As you get more experience, then playing up is something that you might want to try, but I wouldn't do it in the beginning. Now, next thing, do not tolerate any annoying or distracting behavior. I did an entire episode on this if you want to find it. I don't have it in front of me, but for example, and I'm just going to name a few of these because I could talk for another hour about this and I'm not going to, but you have to understand, annoying or distracting behavior, it is against the rules. It's in the rule book. It's not allowed, and you shouldn't have to tolerate it. What a lot of people do, unfortunately, they don't want to make a stink, so they suffer in silence, and then they start complaining when the game is over. I can't believe my opponent did this. I was playing this kid who would not stop fidgeting the whole time. Well, why did you allow, why did you say anything? Why would you play 3-4 hours where he's fidgeting and distracting you and you don't say anything? You have every right to pause the clock and call the TD over if needed. That's why they're there. That's your right in a rated tournament. Now, some of these distracting behaviors, I'll just name a few. One, I'm going to name the ones, I should say, that bother me the most. One of them is the hand hover. That's when someone's thinking and they just kind of keep their hand over the board, like hanging it there. It's like, dude, you got to move that. Like, move your hand. When you want to move the piece. Another thing is repeated draw offers. That usually happens when someone is completely losing or like they hung their queen. It's like every move, I offer a draw, I offer a draw. It's not allowed. Repeated draw offers are not allowed. Another thing is players who stand the whole time. Now, I saw some discussion on this online. It might have been a Twitter post or something. And people were debating, well, does that bother you? Should you say something? Yes. Sit down. Okay. I'm talking about the players, not who, like, they'll stand up occasionally, because even I do that. They'll literally be standing for the whole game, like hovering over the board. No, sit down. It's like, what are you making, a speech or something? Sit down. You're not going to stand over the board for the whole game. That's not happening. It's distracting. And if that bothers you, you need to say something. Okay. They can't stand for the whole game over the board. It's distracting. Another thing, okay, this may seem like ridiculously OCD, but it bothers me, is when my opponent covers the corner of the board with his score sheet. Oh no, you're going to move that, okay? You're not going to cover the corner of the board with the score sheet. It's distracting. Little things like these, if it bothers you, you need to say something, all right? Some people, they shake their leg or they fidget. Finger tapping is another thing. Tap, tap, tap. You ever play with a tapper? Sounds like they're doing Morse code on a submarine or something. Stop tap dancing, okay? Tap, tap, tap. Like, all these things, if it's bothering you, you need to say something, all right? I'm not trying to sound like silly with this, but these are just one of many. I'm giving just a few examples of many possible distracting behaviors. But if it's affecting your game, and if you feel that it's not appropriate, you need to say something. Now, most of the time, if you simply tell your opponent, like, would you, stop tapping your fingers? I'd appreciate. Oh, sometimes they don't realize it. And most of your opponents, these habits, like, to be fair, most of the time when they're doing these things, it's not malicious. Like when they're hovering their hand, or if they're covering the corner of the board with their score sheet, those aren't malicious. Sometimes they don't realize they're doing it. I just want to be fair. This is a very small majority of players that you're talking about, very small percentage. But the real scutches, like the repeated draw offers, things like that, you definitely need to get a TD. All right. And if they don't stop from you saying something, once the TD is called over, that should put an end to it. But the point is, you should not have to deal with these types of behaviors. Now, a little trick. Let's kind of make a right turn here. If your opponent is struggling to find a move, let's say it's a tough position and he's really thinking, not sure what to do, a little trick you can do is to step away from the board, because that's going to make it even more unsettling for him. There's something about he's not sure what to do, and then you walk away. It can kind of throw him off even more. There's something about you not being there. Little trick you can use to kind of get into your opponent's head. And a general tip, kind of an overall, just general tip, be patient. Don't rush. Don't make nervous moves, because when you first start playing in tournaments, nerves can be a big part of it, and you feel the need to maybe move fast or something like that. Just slow down, be patient, don't obsess over the clock, and you'll be fine. Because if you're not patient, that's where the mistakes are going to happen. So try not to rush. That's really the point I'm trying to make. Try not to rush, right? Assuming you're playing in a slow time control. And obviously, if it's one of the major events, it's definitely going to be a slow time control. And last thing I will leave you with, and this is me putting on my TD hat, when the game is over, you cannot analyze in the tournament hall. I know there's that, like as soon as the game's over, it's, oh, I thought you were going to, there's that urge to discuss the game. But if it's a major event, there's usually a Skittles room where you can go and analyze the game. If it's a smaller club, that might not be available, but you cannot talk and discuss the game and analyze it in the tournament hall, because obviously there are other games going on. So that will do it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. Playing in tournaments is certainly exciting. It's fun, but I wanted to give you a reality check as well. So hopefully the information was well-rounded. Hopefully it's helpful. I wish you the best of luck as you enter the exciting world of live over-the-board tournaments. Once again, next week's episode, barring any schedule changes, will feature a guest. It'll be a national master, so I'm looking forward to that. And as always, I hope you win your next game. Have a great day, everybody.